Hello and welcome to GeoWhiskey. Back again after somewhat of a long absence, for which I apologize. But I am back and I want to do something a little bit different. Um, Instead of playing GeoGuessr, I want to try some geolocation, particularly of the genealogical variety. Um, in other words, looking up um, places of interest and importance genealogically to um, my ancestors, which could be interesting, um, could be stupid, could only be of interest potentially to um, people that are related to me, and each one perhaps only to one half of the people that are related to me, uh, as such things go. But um, if you're interested in genealogy, uh, could be um, could be of interest as well. All right, so I did a dry run of this the other day and I failed miserably to find anything that is pinpointable for my mom's dad, um, Clarence Francis, or Buzz as we called him. The records for New Mexico, not great, particularly for such a rural and sparsely populated place as Roy, uh, which is in Hardin County. And as you can see, the nearest state highway pretty far away and kind of out here in the middle of nowhere. 14th least densely populated county in the entire United States. This is what it looks like, but I have no idea where the family home was or where he would have been born after hours of research, uh, fruitless research. Um, but I also looked into my dad's mom, who was born in Eddy County, New Mexico, around Carlsbad, and thought I had kind of gotten as far as possible. However, I found a few other resources that might be able to establish kind of a more general location as to where, if not where she was born, at least where she and the rest of the family were living in the 1920 census. So here's the record for my great grandfather Ed, who was born in Texas and took his young family to New Mexico when the cotton didn't really work out in Seymour and Baylor County, Texas. And as you can see here, at this time, when my grandmother was 2 years old, they were living as boarders in the home of a fella named Cage Jennings um, in Otis, which is not really a place. It's kind of a census designated place um, that's around here somewhere in Eddy County, south of Carlsbad. Wasn't able to find a whole lot about um, Cage Jennings. He has some records here. His name was actually McCager or McCaja, which was actually a fairly common um, name for men in the second half of the 19th century in the South, including at least one of my forebears. But what I did find is he really loved to be a witness um, for land claims. So, the Department of Interior had all these, this land that was part of a grant that if you were homesteading on it for a certain amount of time, then you could, um, then legally own the land. And so the format of these is I mean, they have a serial number. I wasn't able to find much with the serial number because I couldn't find like a map that was attached to it directly. However, I found a way to kind of like look up these coordinates because it's like southwest something, southeast, like it fixes it in a certain place within um, a section that's within a township that's within a range. And there's a way to like track that even today. Like those coordinates are still available, um, even though it doesn't necessarily have any attachment to the original claimant, or it's not parceled out in the same way that it was when the grant was given. You can still kind of find it. Um, and so what I'm going to do is look at these and like assuming that he probably would have been a witness on claims that were close to his land, see if we can narrow down the area where it would have been. So I suppose what I'll do is put all of those in like a sticky note or something, and then run them through the thing that I found. So I've looked at a bunch of those, and we've gotten 5 different instances where Cage Jennings, who owned the home in 1920, where my young grandmother and her parents and siblings were living, and he witnessed these claims of other people, and they're all kind of in the same general area. I mean, they're all in range 27E. A range is obviously the bigger, um, the biggest of the delineations. Uh, but then the townships are all pretty similar, and then like Section 5 on a lot of those, and I'm not sure that it copied over correctly on some of these. So I'm gonna pull up the what I found the other day um, to see if I can narrow it down any further. So this was just one that I kind of searched for, but uh, the way that it's actually most usable is just trying to pinpoint a place, and it tells you what it is right here. So Township 2 South, Range 27 East. Um, so what the census enumerator noted in the results was Otis, which when I search it today comes up right around here. So I'll start here, and we'll see what that gives me. So that's 27 East, 20, 22 South, Section 15. Um, that looks about right. 22, it's kind of in the same general area. So let's see if we can narrow it down more. I know, and this may be something that I'll listen to again later. Um, I have a recording of my great grandmother kind of talking about this era of their lives, and she does mention living, or it seems like she alludes to living close to the river, and that would either be, as you can see, the Pecos or the Black, which I think comes in here. So let's see if we can find, because it seems like a couple of these are Township 23 South. So what would that maybe be? Down one block further. That's Section 22. That's Section 23. Look, the river's right there. And again, this isn't an exact science, right? Because this is, a few people who had homesteads in the same area, and uh, Cage Jennings is probably witnessing to people who live, broadly within, several square miles of his house. But by kind of triangulating where a lot of these are, um, definitely range 27 east, is where we would want to be. And look, if we click over here, we're still in range 27 east. So it's kind of hard to necessarily know, but by looking at kind of how the sections change, um, that's how we can figure it out, right? So this is section 22, 23 here, as we get closer to the river, and that's also something that that we know that they lived close to the river. So let's look again. So there's a lot in section 5, but township 22, 23 is pretty consistent. So let's see, does this put us in a different township? No, a different section. So would the township then be, that's range 28, so we know it's going to be around here. Still the same township. So I don't really know exactly how these grids work. But like that section 23, 22 south. I mean, from everything that like I've gleaned from various things, it's probably somewhere around here. So obviously this is not on like Google Maps, so let's bring that in. And where are we? Right here. That would also make sense, because here's where it puts me when I look for, like, when I search for Otis, it puts me like right around here. In fact, I'll just look it up right now to prove it. Like right here, the Otis Water Users Co-op. And then this is kind of the area where, where I would kind of triangulate and, sort of make an educated guess as to the place where we may be looking. Now, I don't think all right, so here on this Forney Road is the the closest thing. So where am I? Looking? Okay, so east. Okay, so going west here. Acres for sale, no trespassers. So if I want to go towards the Pecos, I'd go further east. And there you can see the river. And this looks like it at one time was a dam. So what I'd like to do now is maybe listen to some of her testimony and see if we can get any closer, or if we can confirm or disconfirm this would have been the area or one of the areas where they lived, because they did live in other places in this general area. When one of my granduncles was born, there's an announcement in the newspaper that places the family home in Malaga, which is down here. So they were not boarding with Cage Jennings for the entire time that they lived in New Mexico before moving back to Texas. But they were in the 1920 census, and this is probably the best chance at pinpointing a place where they were living in New Mexico, because there weren't any other details about where they were in Malaga. And obviously, that was in 1924, and there wasn't another census. So I can't really learn much more about it. So I am enjoying a whiskey right now. It's a Highland Park Cask Strength Batch 3, I believe. Very good. I usually shy away from Highland Park just because, they load it all up with coloring and it's chill filtered and watered down. But this is a really authentic whiskey. It's the best Highland Park owned bottling I've had in almost 20 years, and highly recommended. And it honestly, if I was smelling this blind, I would think it's like a Campbellton or something much more traditional. it just has a lot of those earthy elements. So sláinte.
Uh, that's about 30 miles from Carlsbad. Across the river from Malaga, New Mexico. And it was a white man on a place that said he had done a lot of meetings before he come there. And one night, Ed and old man Haroon was locked up in jail because there's witnesses to something. And Ed sent word by this man to tell me that he wouldn't be home that night. And this man didn't tell me. And he come in my back door, and I had a middle screen door in the middle because I'd had another family in the other rooms. And he come in the back door and come to the screen door, and it blasted. And I made like I had a gun. I said, if you come in here, I'll cut your head off. And but I had some razors, long blade razors, you know. Yeah. 3 or 4 of them up there in the box right over my head and I reached up and got one of them. I just thought if he started in here, I'd just stand up on the foot of the bed and cut him to pieces. And so he didn't come in there though, but he shined the flashlight around. He had a flashlight shined around over. He couldn't see me where I was back there in the corner, you know, but he shined the flashlight on, and I thought, well, he's going to go around and go to that door. He knows he can get in there. And I jumped up right quick when he went out that back door there. I jumped up right quick and jerked my dress and grabbed my dress and slipped out the door and run as hard as I could go out to Miss Berry's. And wasn't too far. I was scared to leave the kids, but I knew he was just mean. He wasn't after the children anyway. And so 3 or 4 of them men that was out there, and her son and her all come out with me, back with me. And so one of the men left his gun there and told me to shoot 16 times and all I had to do was pull the trigger, you know. And but I was still scared. I was just scared too bad to stay by myself with a gun even. Yeah. And Miss Berry told me to go out to her house and stay all night. So I went out there and I sat up all night long. And she'd come in there and feel my back, and she said, you're just like a chunk of ice. Said, can't you lay down? I told her, no, I just couldn't lay down. And so I stayed all night with her, and I got up daylight the next morning and went back home. And we knew, I knew most who it was, and Mr. Berry was out around under the hill there, and this fella run around him coming up there, and he knew who it was, so he told us who it was. Before, he didn't tell it though. We was fixing to leave there. Miss Berry told me she'd tell me who it was if I wouldn't tell Ed until after we got to Texas.
So we were looking up here by where Cage Jennings likely had his homestead at which my ancestors were boarding at the time of the 1920 census. But if you were paying attention while we were listening to my great grandmother, Allie, as she was talking about when they lived across the river from Malaga, and she talked about something about my great grandfather and Mr. Haroon being in jail or something. I didn't really catch that. Uh, and then when you look over across the Pecos from Malaga, and there's Haroon Road and Haroon Ditch. So unfortunately, our street view coverage not great here. In fact, it's terrible Generation 1, which is what we call the awful potato camera. We'll see if there's maybe anything here so we can see across the river, but it's just as bad. But it would have been somewhere in here that they were living for a few years in the 1920s, and that's a great thing to know. It's not too far. Uh, you know, might want to travel there eventually. only 537 statute miles as the crow flies. So that's pretty neat. I didn't think I'd be able to find that much information, but it's kind of cool to see that there is that Haroon Road. I did look in the 1920 census to see if I could find a Haroon, or she also referred to Mrs. Berry and Mr. Berry and a few other people. Didn't see any of those in the Malaga census. I'm not sure if they would have classified it as another location, but likely not. They likely would have taken this whole area as just being Malaga. One thing I may check um, and just go back to that digital repository and look for Haroon in that time period and in that area. So you can see a lot come up in Carlsbad. So here's a really interesting thing, an article from 1921 where it talks about the schools of Eddy County. The various schools ready to begin work, teachers and pupils alike are enthusiastic and everything points to a good and successful school year. So it lists Loving, Malaga, and then Haroon Ranch as its own place. So likely where they were staying at the time, almost kind of like sharecroppers, I guess, um, was considered like its own place and had its own schoolhouse. One conveyance for transporting school children from the Haroon Ranch to Malaga and return. And these are people putting bids in, um, and this is for the year before um, the article I just went over. So in the intervening period, they actually just built a schoolhouse or uh, you know converted another building into one uh, on the ranch so that the children didn't have to be transported to Malaga. Steer hide and 2 stolen saddles found in cave on Black River. While some of the lads were swimming Sunday on Black River, as boys will, they were also exploring the caves below the mineral springs and found blood and hair all over the rocks in the cave. So let's set the scene here. Exploring on Black River, the caves below mineral springs. See if we can find that. See if mineral springs comes up because I remember that was a place I think. No, that's different mineral springs. Uh, okay, so I don't know. That's somewhere. So somewhere around here on the black, they would call mineral springs, but one would assume it would have to be close because the Haroon Ranch is like over here as we've established. So continuing, some of them gathering more courage investigated a little farther and brought forth the hide of a yearling steer that had been killed Saturday night. It proved to be one of J.C. Queen's animals. Mr. Queen was notified, and he and Mr. Black went to the cave Monday morning and brought the hide out. While investigating for some clue as to the identity of the guilty parties, they found stored in the cave two of Dr. Harkey's saddles and blankets which had been stolen a week or so ago. This is the same cave that the Mexicans took refuge in when they broke jail at Carlsbad. A few years ago, two of them were being held for the robbery of the Loving post office and the other one for the murder, which took place up about Lakewood. One of them was killed when they recaptured them on the Haroon Ranch. So at some point, these fellas, these essays, uh, escaped from the jail in Carlsbad and probably making their way south, across the river and would have gone here through the Haroon Ranch. Now, there's another thing here which is interesting because I searched for the name Swadley in these in the newspaper, and it didn't. It came up with a few results, some things about oh, so and so was in the honor society or whatever. Holmes Willis Swadley, who I think is either my granduncle um, or great granduncle, being uh, reaching his majority and being eligible for the draft. This in 1918 during the Great War in Europe. Um, However, I didn't see this. So it says, Ed Swadley is ginning the first 3 bales of cotton at Malaga today. Of course, they were cotton farmers. So that's really interesting. Mrs. Margaret and Catherine Haroon and Miss Lane spent Tuesday shopping and visited. So what I probably should do, considering that the ocular text recognition doesn't seem to be awesome if it didn't return this to me before, I should probably do, perhaps in another episode or just on my own time, is look at all of the Malaga news sections of the Carlsbad Current, because that could potentially yield um, some more details and some more information on this. But as it stands now, um, I'm ready to say pretty definitively that if they were across the river from Malaga during that time, they were probably living in this area. And when they were living boarding with Mr. Cage Jennings, it was almost certainly somewhere here around the Pecos. Alrighty. Well, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Cheers.